This is it. This is it. I've been here before. I started this project. I say project, I've not really given it any kind of particular focus, other than it's been sitting at the back of my awareness for ages, taunting me, mocking me with its challenge. Mostly because I rarely, if ever, get the opportunity to sit down and have some time for myself. And when I do, I'm usually hanging out with Maddie. So finding an opportunity to expand on this here and really be able to take you guys along for the ride is kind of fun. It's a fun prospect. It's a fun challenge. It's a fun idea. Maybe it's fun just for me, but we'll see as the videos pan out. So a few things to get off. I love puzzles. I love the challenge of them. It doesn't mean, by the transitive properties, that just because I like spending time with things doesn't mean I'm any good at them. Right? But again, we'll learn that out as we go. This will be a matter of the skill section applied rather than any flair or dramatic tendencies other than the ones that I have anyway. And yeah, it's 100 pages. That's all. No instructions beyond the basics. No map. No key. 100 pages of dense literary prose printed deliberately out of order. The frustrating buggers. And your job, our job, my job, is to try and just put them back in the right order. Easy. Okay, but there are more possible arrangements of these 100 pages than there are atoms in the observable universe. The actual number, if you want to be precise about it, and we should be, is 9.3 followed by 157 zeros. That's not an exaggeration for effect. And it is only one of those arrangements that is correct. The others are just noise, flamboyance, distractions. I find that genuinely interesting. Not intimidating, although it is interesting. Because what that number tells you is that you can't just brute force it. You can't shuffle randomly and just stumble onto an answer. Every single move has to be reasoned. Every connection has to be earned. And I do think that the great irony would also be that on exploration of the jawbone itself, that the way it was printed is the actual solution. I would find that hilarious if that was the case. I obviously don't know if that's the case yet, but there it is. So essentially, yes, it is billed as the most challenging literary puzzle of all time, but it's not a puzzle in the strictest sense. It's more of an investigation. The version most people encounter today comes as a box of cards, and I tried to obtain said box of cards. They are available online, but they cost $350, and I don't have the budget for that. But essentially, what it was is each page is a separate card, which is both a gift and a problem. It's a gift because you can physically move them around, you can lay them out, you can cluster them, you can build a board. It turns a reading exercise into something that looks a lot more like a crime scene, right? It's a problem because 100 loose cards with no inherent or discernible order is just chaos. It's chaos. Now, for those of you that don't know, the original 1934 book was a bound book, which meant the pages were shuffled, printed, and bound in the wrong order on purpose, obviously. You couldn't even separate them without damaging the thing. You had to work from the text alone in your head. Well, the book just sat there, perfectly innocent. That is downright unfriendly and triggering and offensive, which means I respect it. I respect it. Now, to understand why this thing even exists at all, you really have to understand what Britain looked like in 1934. You're 14 years out from the end of the First World War. The country has spent a decade and a half trying to process something essentially unprocessable. Not even sure if that's a word. 16 million people dead. Entire generations of men gone from villages, from towns, from families. And what did people reach for? Puzzles. Now, I'm not being glib about it, or at least I'm trying not to be glib. I'm trying to be sincere, because this is documented. The interwar period is the golden age of the cryptic crossword, the golden age of detective fiction, the golden age of the locked room mystery. Agatha Christie, Dorothy L. Sayers, John Dixon Carr, all producing their best work in this window. There was an almost cultural obsession with the idea that hidden things could be found, that chaos could be ordered, that if you were clever enough and you were careful enough, you could work out what happened and who did it. Cains Jawbone seems to be that kind of thought, just pushed to its absolute logical limit. Now, when it was published, Torquemada offered a prize. 25 quid. 25 pounds to the first correct solution. In today's money, that makes it sound like Monopoly money. In today's money, that's somewhere near £1,800. It's not life-changing, but it's not nothing either. The Observer published the challenge. The public attempted it. 2 people submitted correct solutions in 1935. The names are on the record. Mr. S. Sidney Turner and Mr. W. S. Kennedy. A third person also solved it that year and received a personal note of congratulations from Mathers himself, but didn't claim the prize. 3 people in the entire first run of this puzzle. Then the book went out of print. Bastards. The solution, such as it was, went with it. Nobody apparently thought to write it down in a form that survived. The puzzle became a rumor, something puzzle enthusiasts mentioned in the same breath as things that might not have even been real. It took 85 years for it to come back. The man who made this was Edward Powys Mathers. Born in Forest Hill, London in 1892, Oxford educated, Trinity College by training, a poet and a translator. That second part is pretty important by the sounds of things. Mathers spent years translating Eastern poetry and literature into English. He worked from Sanskrit, from Chinese, from Persian, from Arabic, from Hindustani. His 12-volume English translation of 1000 Nights and One Night is still referenced today. The New York Times noted that he rendered into English poems from almost all the Asiatic languages. Some of his translations were later set to music by Aaron Copland. Now, it becomes clear that this was not a man that thought in straight lines. He thought in layers, in registers, in the space between what a text says and what it means. So the pseudonym, much like Erdnase in Expert at the Card Table, he wrote puzzles under the name Torquemada, or Torquemada. Thomas de Torquemada. He was the first Grand Inquisitor of Spain. 15th century, the man who ran the Spanish Inquisition at its height. Famous, if that's even the right word, for the rigor and the relentlessness of his methods. Mathers apparently chose that name deliberately. He was telling you up front that he intended to put you through something, that there would be no mercy in the design, that the puzzle would push until you either solved it or you crumbled into a crying mess on the floor. I don't know that he said that last word, that last part, as descriptively as that, but that's kind of the impression that it gives. He started publishing cryptic crosswords in The Observer in 1926, continued until his death in 1939. 13 years. 670 published puzzles. They were considered the hardest crosswords in Britain, possibly even the world. So I put my other spectacles on so you can see. These are some of the crosswords themselves. I've been through a few, not many, like 2, 3 tops. So I've come to further in the book, so I don't chance any hints. Here we go. Here, one across. Such an instinct leads to the multiplication of hand-worked slippers. Here we go. 23 across. Such a wort is pleasant to burn. 37 down. Admitting all that with ham, I'm a tone. Oh, that was a solution. I want to see that. Here we go. 1 down. To grow such a beard does not sound as if it would suit polar explorers. I mean, what the flip? How abstract can a puzzle be? You know, it's insane. But then, in 1934, he decides that crosswords, they're not hard enough. You got to respect the game, right? You got to respect it. So he creates Cains Jawbone. 100-page prose narrative, 6 murders, 6 murderers, 6 victims, written in an elusive literary style that assumes you know interwar British cultural references, your classical poetry, your detective fiction conventions. That bit, fine. The first 2, iffy at best. The text is full of quotations, of puns, of spoonerisms, of word games, and embedded clues. I should tell you, I've read it through, because I said I was going to start work on this a while back. And so I have read it through. That was cut to when the video was out on YouTube, however many years ago that was, and I've not read it since. Right? So we are as fresh as we can be together. Torquemada, the crossword setter, never went off duty. Every paragraph in the book must be doing multiple jobs at once, and then the whole thing was printed out of order deliberately with no indication of what the correct sequence is beyond the internal logic of the text itself. So even if you were thinking there would be, because it's a narrative, there would have to be certain pages that, you know, if you get and the killer was, that you might think at the end of the book, you get and the on the end of a page, and it starts the next page with killer was, because it's just a narrative printed out of sync. No. Torquemada is way ahead of you on that. The puzzle appears as the final 100 pages of a larger book, a Torquemada puzzle book published in 1934 by Victor Golansk, the same publisher, incidentally, who had published George Orwell's Down and Out in Paris and London the previous year. Victor had printed 4,000 copies. There is no record of actual sales. The world was not ready for it. And, I mean, look at the title, Cains Jawbone. It's a reference that works on two levels, which is very on brand for this man. Cain, from Genesis, the first murderer. The jawbone, from the book of Judges, where Samson uses the jawbone of an ass as a weapon. So the title is already pointing you toward murder, toward improvised violence, towards the idea that the most obvious weapon isn't always the most obvious weapon. But there's a third layer. Shocking, right? In Act 5 of Hamlet, the gravedigger scene, Hamlet picks up a skull and says that skull had a tongue in it and could sing once. He's contemplating Yorick. He's contemplating what the dead can tell you if you know how to ask. Cain's Jawbone is a puzzle about reading what the dead are trying to say. So the title isn't just a decorative, quirky little thing, you know, designed to stop the scroll. After 1935, 3 solutions confirmed, the book vanishes for decades. Cain's Jawbone was essentially mythological in puzzle circles. Some people had heard about it, you know, a thing that had happened. The solution itself was never made public, which meant the puzzle remained technically unsolved in any open sense. The correct page order, the names, the logic, all of it locked inside those 3 verified submissions and whatever private correspondence Mathers had kept. Mathers died in 1939. He was 46. The war came. Other things obviously took precedence. The revival started, of all places, at Shandy Hall. That's the home of Lawrence Sterne, the 18th century novelist who wrote Tristram Shandy, a book that is itself famous for playing games with linear narrative, for blank pages and marbled pages and chapters that arrive in the wrong order. The Lawrence Sterne Trust, which runs Shandy Hall as a literary museum almost, received a donation of the Torquemada puzzle book at some point, and their creator, who has a phenomenal name, Patrick Wildgust, started to look seriously at it. Wildgust put out a public call in The Guardian, asking if anyone had the solution. Nobody did. But the call itself confirmed that people cared, that this thing had not been entirely forgotten. And so in 2019, the crowdfunding publisher Unbound reissued Cain's Jawbone as a standalone edition with new artwork by cartoonist Tom Gould, a new prize, roughly the equivalent of the original one. In the first year, they'd sold about 4,000 copies, the same number that was printed in 1934. Interest was there, but it was slow. And then 2 things happen at roughly the same time. John Finnemore is a British comedian and a crossword compiler. In 2020, he solved it. during the COVID lockdown. He looked at it before and concluded it was, in his words, just beyond him. Then, as if some pure quirk of fate traps him at home for 6 months with nowhere to go and no one to see. He submits his solution, and it is correct. He then becomes the 4th person in history to solve Cains Jawbone. Simultaneously, a woman called Sarah Scannell started posting videos of her attempts to solve it on TikTok. She didn't, but 80,000 people watched her try. And then they went and bought the book. So from 4,000 copies in its first year, sales of the 2019 edition eventually cleared 500,000. The Guardian confirming that figure in early 2023. One puzzle, 90-something years old, solved by 4 people, 500,000 copies. Something in that's hit a nerve. And I think I know what it is. People are hungry for problems. Problems that actually require thought. Not trivia, not Googling, not pattern matching, not speed. Actual, sustained, disciplined, uncomfortable thinking. Cains Jawbone has that in spades. Which is presumably why I'm standing here, with an unreasonable degree of confidence. So before we touch a single page, I want to be clear about how I'm going to approach it. Because method matters in an investigation. That's all that I know. Bad methods won't just slow you down, it will mislead you. You will build confidence in a direction that's wrong, and then you defend it, and then you're stuck. And I've seen that happen so many times that I am trying to not let it happen here. So the first thing I'm going to do is refuse to treat it as a game. Games have levels. Games have checkpoints. Games are designed to be completed by most people who just try hard enough, give it enough time. This isn't that. This is a case. Cases have evidence. Evidence has to be read, weighed, corroborated, and tested before you draw conclusions from it. You don't move to a conclusion just because it feels right. You move to a conclusion when you have enough corroborating evidence that you'd be comfortable defending it to someone who's actively trying to pull it apart. That's the standard I'm working to. And then one rule. Non-negotiable. Anyone who's trained with me will know about the G word. I will never guess. I'm going to say that again because there's 20-odd people that just went, he said it. I will never guess. Mostly because that sounds simple to say, and it isn't. I'm not going to move past the page unless I can articulate a reason to do so. Not a feeling, not an instinct that I can't unpack. A reason, something in the text that connects this page to this page. And this is it, and if I can't give that reason, we won't move on. That will slow me down. Dramatically, probably. Good. Speed is the enemy of accuracy in an investigation. Anyone who tells you otherwise is selling you something. And I've competed in memory championships. Bear with me. My monitor's about to go off. Clearly, I've been talking to you for too long. I've competed in memory championships. Now, I don't hold any records. I mention this not to try and be, oh, isn't that funny? Right? Just because it's relative to the method. One of the core problems in Cains Jawbone is tracking threads across 100 pages of dense text while you're actively reorganizing the sequence. Every time you move a page, the chain of what you think you know shifts. It has to. Things that seem to connect no longer do. Things you hadn't noticed suddenly become significant. Most people try to manage this with notes and spreadsheets, which is great. I'm going to be using memory architecture with that, building a spatial map of it in my head of where things sit, what connects to what, which characters I've placed and which are still floating. Think of it as like running 2 databases simultaneously. One on the table in front of me, one in my head, and then we check each other. Okay, we have the room set up to facilitate this, which I'm going to show you. as well. But there's a trap in this kind of puzzle. You start to see patterns, and because you've seen a pattern, you start treating it as confirmed before it is confirmed. Pattern recognition is useful. Pattern assumption is how you end up 40 pages in, convinced you're right. Then you find a page that categorically cannot belong in the sequence you built. And then you have to go back. So the discipline is that patterns are hypotheses, not conclusions. A hypothesis becomes a working conclusion when it's been tested against the material and survived, not before. So we will make that decision out loud. So when I say I think, I mean hypothesis. When I say I'm confident, I mean tested. Those aren't interchangeable, okay? The moment you read someone else's thoughts or conclusions or ideas or impressions or considerations, your brain might start working to confirm it or to negate it rather than just to find it independently. Confirmation bias exists, right? It's a cognitive process. The only way around it is to not introduce the contaminant in the first place. So clean start. My eyes, my method, my conclusion. If I get it completely wrong, which, given the numbers, is highly likely, that will also be on camera. You're welcome. Every investigation has an opening move. It's the first piece of evidence you choose to examine and why. Mine is built on a principle from investigative work that I've used in the field. You don't start with the most interesting thing. You start with the most fixed thing. Something with the fewest possible alternative interpretations. A datable reference, a named individual, a specific cultural event, something that anchors a page. Whether that be in time or place or a character's mouth, the anchor needs to be there. Those pages become your fixed points. Once you have fixed points, you have a skeleton. Once you have a skeleton, you can start to hang the rest of the text on it. Okay? So some of the technical points to think about. 100 pages, no sequence, no instruction, just chaos given to you in a very pretty cover, but chaos all the same. That's what every investigation looks like before you start, before anyone tells you it's solvable. The conclusion is control. So imagine this. I don't know who these people are yet. I know there are 6 of them. I know some of them are connected. What I am not going to do is flip them all at once and try to read everything simultaneously. That isn't thinking. That's just hoping something jumps out. It's a beginner error. The temptation to flip everything immediately, that's a mistake. One of the things that makes this puzzle almost impossible is the assumption that any given page is telling you the truth about where it sits in the story. Sometimes what looks like a change of sequence is misdirection. You have to know the difference between a genuine cut, a genuine shuffle, and a false one. Most people will flip things over as soon as they can. First available conclusion, done, filed. That's not how it works. It can't. You can't turn the thing around until you've earned the capacity to do so. The flip, the turn, is the conclusion. It's not the starting point. So here's what not to do. Here's what it looks like when you try to hold everything at once. Nobody can work with this. The brain doesn't do pattern recognition at scale. It does it at unit level. So we work in the units. Manageable clusters of information. Forgive the numbers. Playing cards don't exactly correlate towards the specifics of Cains Jawbone, but there we are. Imagine 4 suspects, 4 story threads, 4 potential murderers. And I don't know yet which suit is which, but I know they exist. We can start here and see if the internal sequence makes sense, and then build out. Deductive logic. So if every card in this sequence belongs to the same suit, and this card belongs to this sequence, then this card is a spade. That's not a guess. That is a forced conclusion. The premises did the work. The reveal could almost be anticlimactic. That's the point. Deduction doesn't surprise, it confirms. Looking at 5 cards, if all of them are red, the working assumption is that this sequence runs red. So the assumption was wrong or incomplete, or this card does not belong in this sequence. I don't know which one it is yet. What I do know is that one black card does not destroy the pattern. It asks a question. Induction is the logic that we use through most of this puzzle. It's also the one that's most likely to mislead, but we can work with that. And then abductive. 7 of hearts. I don't have context yet, but I know it's a 7, which puts it in the middle range. I know it's hearts, which puts it in one thread. I know the back is slightly worn at the corner, which tells me it's been handled more than the others. I don't know where it goes, but I have a best current explanation, so I will work from that until the evidence says otherwise. So all murderers in this story appear in at least 2 pages. Imagine this character appears in at least 2 pages. What does that tell me? It tells me this character is a candidate, not a certainty, a candidate. A valid syllogism can still be wrong if a premise is wrong. So imagine we got 4 cards face down on the table, 4 tools, 1 deck. So here's how we work this. We flip the first card. Certainty, where the logic holds, right? Induction might be to flip the second card to develop patterns that I can work from. Abduction, flipping the third card, is a best explanation when I can't get to certainty yet. And then syllogism on the 4th card is essentially the skeleton I hang all 3 on. If 1 card remained face down, everything else is just turning this over carefully. These are some of the technical points we have to think about when approaching a story like this.
Right, let's flip and do this. I've got my fancy jacket on for anyone who cares or who is curious, which might just extend to me and my darling wife. This is my Gomez Adams replica jacket and makes me feel glorious because Raul Julia is fucking amazing. Now, the study, the Sanctum Sanctorum, may not exactly be thrilling to most, but it is where I come to do a lot of my work, my reading, my playing, and my general crafting and creating. And one of the things I was going to do was I was going to do a little aside each time where we would explore and expand upon our puzzle literacy together. Though I don't know that we can do that now because I went through the whole footage before and solved all of the 10 puzzles. It was great. There was nonograms. There was physical manipulation puzzles, the works. And in true me style, the sound didn't work. So we are essentially doing this again. So I might speed through some of the explanations a little more directly in certain circumstances, and that is entirely because this isn't the first time I'm doing them. For those complaining about the lighting, and there will be some, I don't have an extension cord for that, but I do have a ninja throwing star that sometimes works on the board. Should have filmed that in 1,000 frames per second, but we'll leave that there for now. Okay, so if you're wondering what this is on the floor, and that's soundproofing because of the walls and the flooring that's down, the sound echoes quite a lot in here. So you have to do a lot to get it to be even some way palatable. Now, I've got the full Cains Jawbone down here. I don't know if this technically constitutes a crime. I'm hoping it doesn't, but we shall see. Okay? So, there's that. And I initially started off with only half of that wall done with the felt. But I couldn't let it was kind of like a right angle with one of them that was purchased. And so I had to get another one. I can't be looking at uneven surfaces the entire time. So let's get into this. Right, starting now. Okay. I went and bought an extension cable. Okay, here we are. If you're thinking, oh, Ben, it still looks pretty shit. Nobody sees this on the videos that I make normally. You're in the puzzle world now. Right? It's never going to be a sprawling, beautiful, artistic New York apartment in the Arconia, but we can still work on a mystery together. Now, I could agonize over the technical ways to approach Cains Jawbone all the livelong day, but I don't know who that's going to help, and there are so many variables to consider. So I'm going to treat it like an investigation, like a criminal investigation, and I'm going to gather up each individual piece of information from every page and plot for convergences, plot for frames, plot for connections, plot for people, objects, locations, actions, use the reasoning to connect them, and apply using the methods that I've been working on for nearly 30 years to see if, they obviously apply in real life. That's what I do for a living. But see if they apply to puzzles where real life is a lot less dull by comparison. So here we are, page 1. Now, what I'm going to try and do is encourage you all to play along if you want to, because I love puzzles and I don't want to inadvertently, accidentally, kind of on purpose, give away any spoilers for the whole thing. So what I have to do is talk about this in such a way that if you're following along, you'll be with me, and we can kind of work on this together. Many heads rather make light work. But it might be a kind of a vain attempt, but it's an attempt all the same to preserve the secrecy and the mythology around this. So, we're dealing with page 1. Obviously, we don't know at this stage if 1 connects to the next page or the 91st page by now. So we're taking the little standout elements that the writer would have to communicate for meaning to be understood. And so we are, okay, let's tighten that up. Here, slacker. So we are here, right? There are 4, 8, 12, 13 standout pieces, and there's my ninja throwing star. So the first thing that stood out was the discussion of an appointed table. An appointed table speaks to specific locational requirements. Now, this doesn't always have to mean a restaurant in which there are appointed tables for you to sit at with your party, or the table that you've booked at, or the only location that specific groups of people. Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of different ways you can get an appointed table. But like in this particular room itself, this is my appointed chair. I could read sat there, but this is my appointed chair. You see what I mean? There's communication of routine, and the taking up of my pen. Taking up of my pen is normally a writer's term. It's the choosing of a specific item to facilitate a specific action. Okay? And then it moves into the first kind of description of mood and scene setting and the kind of mystery that this puzzle might be intending to throw my way, which is call me Fey, as in F-E-Y, not F-A-Y or F-A-Y-E, F-E-Y. I didn't know what that meant at the start. So I went to some of the online dictionaries, and apparently this is in relation to, if you were to call someone Fey, it is to call them otherworldly and eccentric and touched by magic. But in this particular context of calling someone Fey, there's also indications about being marked for death. Not in a Steven Seagal way, at least not an inherently Steven Seagal way, but in a foreboding sense of it. And then my memory caught up around the Orlando Bloom and Cara Delevingne show, where the magical characters were called the Fae. And then there is a description of a pen as mottled. Mottled as a surface. It has don't judge by handwriting. It has, judge it if you want, it doesn't matter. You don't need to read it. But these are the notes that I'm going through. A mottled pen. A mottled pen creates on the surface an uneven or spotty or streaky appearance. There is signatures that go around with this. And what I mean by signatures, as in the signature of the pen, not at least by using the pen to write a signature. It's then known as an Aquarius pen, which, if that isn't a particular name for it, Henry is a callback to later in the book. Don't forget, I said I did some work on this before. I have read it through twice. Okay? I've read it through twice. I've only worked on it for the first couple of pages. And that's within the few years that are apart. Then it goes on to talking about an order in Amsterdam. An order. I only know of that to be in relation to things like a group of people, or, an action or a conglomeracy. An order in Amsterdam, the Order of the Phoenix. No, never mind. And we get Casey Ferris. It's spelt in a way that I've never seen before. C-A-S-Y. Doesn't mean it's still not a name. But from the way it was dropped into the sentence about watching the sea, I thought it could be a person or a boat. But then with the description of passing by with down-dropped eyes, again, that's normally about sadness, death. At the very least, it's submissive to have down-dropped eyes. Then there is a discussion of a valetudinarian walrus, and the discussion of someone's father, most likely Casey's. Valetudinarian, I was aware of. This is in reference to being anxious about one's health. And if you are a walrus-like individual in your build, you would very likely be anxious about your health. Then he talks about St. Lazarus in the Chine, which sounds like the delivery of a church or something like that. But specifically, when you look at Chine is in reference to a gorge or an alcove in the sea, something that you might get in Dorset or Dover or the Isle of Wight. It could be anywhere in the world by now. This is just the first page, but St. Lazarus in the Chine, I only know of being in reference to churches in England. But Torquemada means, the heritage is very religious as well, so it could also be in that neck of the woods, but that's what a Chine is in relation to. Then he speaks about graves and martyrs and the warps are crying. I had no smegging idea what a warp was. And so, to the ornithological side of Google, I went. Turns out warps are another name for a curlew, which is a Scottish wading bird. Likely for atmospheric delivery. But then he moves on to the discussion of flotsam fish, flotsam being the debris that sits on the ocean, most likely after crashes and the like, but that's not always the case. Flotsam fish are dead fish that are on the water that attract birds. But then the first sign of wordplay for me at this stage, because I know it's wordplay, there may be things earlier on that are wordplay. Well, birds are making whoopee. Making whoopee is a very, hey, nudge, nudge, wink, 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 hopping on the good foot, doing the bad thing kind of approach, but it's spelled in the same way as the warps, making warpy. Final line being, but all the nice gulls love a sailor. In 1908, there was a musical called All the Nice Girls Love a Sailor. Very likely reference to the flotsam fish and the birds making whoopee activity, wordplay. But who's speaking at the minute? Who is he? That's the question. Strange that he comes into my head so much today. There's a lot of things to think about. And that's just from page 1. What we can take away from this is it's very easy to become slightly disheartened. We're at page 1 of a monolithic Herculean task. But the good news is we have washboard music to keep us company. And Ninja Throne stars. So if frustration abounds, that will be the place that we can go together. All right? I don't have a Martin Short-esque, overly dramatic, Raoul Julia kind of dramatism ending for you. Suffice it to know, as we move further along in Cains Jawbone, I would hope that we seek to understand precisely who he is, who Casey is, who's speaking. Like, am I just, like, as I read this, it starts with I sit down, so the I, am I a character? Am I in it? Could I be killed? Could I be a killer? Or am I sitting above the narrative in that way? Can I get more of an idea as to the setting, the location, wherever it is in the world? So that's lots to think about from page 1. It's important for observers and problem solvers of any kind not to commit too soon. So if this is tickling your intellectual pickle, make sure you subscribe to the podcast so you can follow along with each new Cains Jawbone update that there is. And you never know, maybe we can solve this historic puzzle together.
The deduction is